Hello, I'm Robert Emmett Hernan. I'm head of BlueStack Productions, the publisher of Irish Environment, an online resource for environmental matters on the island of Ireland. We're here today for another in our series of conversations on environmental matters. I'm very pleased today to welcome Dr. James Robinson, the director of the Royal Society for Protection of Birds in Northern Ireland. You're very welcome, James.
Thank you.
And James, why don't you tell the audience what the RSPB is and what it does?
So the RSPB is a charity. It's the largest nature conservation charity in the whole of Europe. We have a remit across the whole of the United Kingdom, and we're supported by towards 1.1 million members across the whole of that area. And our aim really is to make a better world for birds and people. And we are involved in a variety of projects across the whole of the UK, which involve things like nature reserve management, policy advocacy, education work, inspiring people through getting them outdoors and seeing the natural world. And we do a huge amount of great work and have been very successful over the years in the work that we've been doing.
Do you own land for conservation purposes?
We own over 200 nature reserves, or manage that amount of nature reserves across the whole of the UK. And in Northern Ireland we have 10 areas of which we have management or ownership. And we manage that land specifically for the wildlife for which it's important, whether it be on Rathlin Island for things like the threatened chough, the Irish hare, to places like County Fermanagh on the islands in Lough Erne, where we manage the land specifically for threatened breeding waders like lapwings and curlews, but also some woodlands which are very important for things like the Irish whitebeam. So our nature reserves are very important for us because really for us it's the most secure way that we can protect wildlife across the whole of the UK.
Is that also the way in which the public generally comes in contact with the society, probably more frequently than in some other work through these conservation areas? We
have a lot of people who come to our reserves. In Northern Ireland annually we'd have face-to-face contact with about 30,000 people. So you know that we're giving them an opportunity to see the natural world, to become inspired about it, because I think our feeling is that people need to be inspired and they want and need to protect the world around them. And you know, if people don't care about the natural world, they're not going to protect it for the future. So making that effort is very important to us.
And how many members with the society in Northern Ireland?
So in Northern Ireland at the moment we have about 11,500 members, which is good. And last year, 2009-10, the growth rate of membership in Northern Ireland was higher than anywhere else in the UK for the RSPB, which I think is a very, very positive thing. It shows that people are genuinely concerned, and even during times of recession, are very happy to support nature conservation and an organisation that does great things. And
you were appointed director when?
So I became director of the RSPB in Northern Ireland in September of last year. So my role now really is to guide the great ship that is the RSPB in Northern Ireland, and I have 50 members of staff who help to make Northern Ireland a better place for birds and people. And we also have this enormous army of volunteers who help us as well, and they contribute annually about 20,000 hours to our work. And without them, you know, it'd be very difficult for us to do all the great things that we do.
Now, I thought, James, that we would talk today about biodiversity. And I wonder if you could explain to the audience your sense of what that term means, biodiversity.
So biodiversity to a scientist really does what it says on the tin. So bio, life, diversity, meaning variety. And that's really what biodiversity means. It's the variety of life that we have. But to most people, I think biodiversity is a word maybe that they don't really come across that often, but they would come across the word nature. And nature really is what biodiversity is. So it's all of that natural world that we have around us, whether it be birds, mammals, insects, all of the things that we have, and the habitats and the ecosystems which support those species as well. You know, it's a really important thing. It's an important thing not just intrinsically. For me, I love nature and I want it to be there. I don't really care if it has any economic or social benefit. I just like nature. It makes me feel better. But it also has these other values as well. And I think often we forget just how valuable biodiversity is to human beings.
Now, James, one of the there's a recent article in the Irish Times, in fact, that said in the Republic of Ireland, I think about 18% of the people know what biodiversity is, and that's down from 22% in 2007. And so I think we all have a problems sometimes selling what we believe in terms of environmental. Climate change is certainly an issue of that. And when you talk to people about, do you use the term biodiversity, do you use nature? How do you communicate those issues to the general public?
It's a lot to do with the audience. So if we're lobbying, for example, at the Convention of Biodiversity, of course, then we'll use the term biodiversity. So with politicians and civil servants, it's very important to use that language. But when we're talking to members of the public, we would generally use nature as a way of describing what we mean. And I think, although you say the knowledge of the word biodiversity among people is quite low, I think if you ask people, do they know about the corncrake, or do they know about the Irish hare, or do they know about, the fantastic water birds that come to Dublin Bay every year? People go, yeah, no, I understand that. That makes a lot of sense. And when you explain it in those terms, I think people have a genuine love of nature. I think they see a cultural link to it. And I think then that it makes, people, as I say, want to kind of protect it for the future. And that's kind of what we're about a lot of the time. It's giving people that opportunity to understand more about nature, and really to understand how it can be protected in the future.
Now, using the dreaded word biodiversity, I will, because in fact this is 2010 is the year of biodiversity within the EU, and there was a commitment a number of years ago that the EU and countries within it would stop the loss of biodiversity, habitat, and so forth. How's that going?
So unfortunately, this great target to halt the loss of biodiversity hasn't been met, and I think that's been accepted now across governments across the world. In Northern Ireland, we had a kind of very different situation in that although we were bound by this 2010 target, the executive, the Assembly, decided many years ago when it developed its own Northern Ireland biodiversity strategy that really we'd be trying to halt biodiversity loss by 2016. So we got a little bit of time to make this right. But it's a big issue, and I think the struggle that has been seen across the world to halt biodiversity loss is showing, I think, that there is a need to redouble our efforts to secure the restoration and the protection of biodiversity wildlife across the world, because once it's gone, and it's not there for future generations. And the biodiversity, as I say, has intrinsic value, but it also has these other values, the ecosystem services that wildlife can provide to people. You think about some of our floodplains that we've destroyed over the years. Well, actually restoring floodplains is one way of economically sensible way of managing water problems in the future. We've got our peat bogs. If there's one thing that across the island of Ireland is famous for, it's our peat bogs. They're our lungs, they're our rainforest. And it stores an enormous amount of carbon. So protecting our peat bogs is protecting our future, because it would actually be mitigating the effects of climate change. So there are all of these different elements as well.
Now, James, going back to the biodiversity stresses within the bird community in Northern Ireland, what birds or what species are at risk here, and where is in general the bird population in the north?
So there are mixed fortunes, as there always is, and the story's never always straight. We, every 7 years or so, undertake a process called the Birds of Conservation Concern Analysis, where we look at trends and population sizes of birds across the island. And we do it on an all-island basis, because biogeographically that makes more sense, because of course birds don't really understand that there's a border. And that gives us really good information on which species need the most attention. So for many of the species that are currently most in trouble, most in need of conservation action, would tend to be things like farmland birds, birds that have a reliance on wetland habitats during the summer months, but also a number of species, birds of prey, which have suffered persecution in the past, but are starting to recover after years of those sorts of problems.